Hey there, guys. Alright, today we are back with some more overly sarcastic productions, and this time, that's another trope talk. This time, one on character deaths. Oh. Before we dive in, though, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I'd love if you join the Discord and follow me over at Twitch. Okay, character death. This is one that is very easy to mess up. And for me, what makes a death good is the death has to linger. That character still has to linger in the minds of the others that are still living on. In A Song of Ice and Fire, you have Ned Stark constantly being mentioned, even all the way into, he dies in book 1 and he's constantly being referenced still in book 5. That is a good character death because it has impact. People are still, Robb Stark's death in book 3 still has importance to it, right? They, even the minor characters, or at least the Song of Ice and Fire is very good at this, and it's actually very hard to do this, I feel like. And so I'm taking one excellent example. I'll try and think of some other minor examples that are a bit better about character deaths. But yeah, you have even minor character deaths that happened, like during the Red Wedding, playing an important role in everything happening with the North in A Song of Ice and Fire. But one example actually that I think where it can really, I can't really think of any bad examples of character deaths happening in A Song of Ice and Fire off the top of my head that don't really like play an impactful role. I mean, he kills a lot of people, but they all have every death is still very important. It still aids the story, right? One death that I can say that once it's the Mistborn trilogy, Era 1 Mistborn. There is a death that happens in book 1 that is well done. That death impacts, really there are 2 deaths that impact the rest of the series. Really well done. That death in particular I don't have a problem with. However, then there are deaths in, I believe, in book 2. I remember thinking this as I was reading it, where I was kind of confused, like, oh, did he die? Right? Like there were a character or 2 characters that end up getting killed in book 2, where I'm kind of just, it just felt as though they were killed off so that to try and get this feeling of the heroes are they're not, they may not make it, right? That's kind of what those deaths felt like they served. They didn't really seem to serve any greater purpose or narrative purpose other than they just needed to die to make the threat feel more like a threat to me. All right, another death. Let me look at my books. They're I have a bookshelf right there behind my bed. I'm trying to think. Books. The Star Wars books, actually. The High Republic Star Wars books. When characters die, they seem to have a pretty. They seem to be pretty impactful so far. I'm waiting on the 4th book in their like the adult novel that they're making. To see if like they're gonna keep that trend, because there's a character that died in book 3 that I'm curious to see how they continue on with that. But yeah, anyways, let's go ahead and dive into Red's trope talk here, because I rambled for quite a while.
One of the pieces of writing advice I never really liked was this: if you're stuck, kill a character. Now, part
Yeah, I never liked that either.
of this was because I love all my characters and refuse to murder any of them, but the more widely applicable
I like killing my characters. Or well, I actually don't really kill that many characters. Or well, no, in the current story I'm writing, there's gonna be a lot of fucking death. Hopefully, I do it right. But in the first book that I wrote, there wasn't actually that many. I'm trying to think of explicitly named characters that died. Eight, maybe? Eight characters died in my first book that I wrote that I'm still trying to fucking find an agent for, I think was the number. Been a while since I've looked at it.
problem is that killing off characters is actually really hard. Well, I mean, it's not hard to kill a character because you're the writer and you can do anything. What I mean is, it's hard to convincingly kill off a major character. See, major character death is an insanely powerful trope for all kinds of reasons. It annihilates the status quo, hurts your audience and your surviving characters, and is almost guaranteed to have long-standing character repercussions. Not only that, but the death of a loved one is one of those things that almost everyone has a personal experience.
And the why this trope tends to miss the mark is because authors at times tend to miss exactly let's go back here. God, how many frames do I gotta go back? Jesus Christ, come on. Fucking hell, do I have to... There we go. Lasting character consequences and hurts characters. And sometimes it doesn't, like, it also has to uproot the status quo. Trying to think really of a good way of phrasing uproot, what it means to really uproot the status quo, but I can't think of the right words to describe how I think it means in my head. But hurts the characters and lasting character consequences. In my opinion, writers seem to forget those last 2 points, or at least it hurts them initially and then they move on. And then they seem to be fucking forgotten from that point forward, right? Which is why I think George, even though people kind of, people do have criticism of him killing too many characters, I feel like you can't say that they don't have lasting consequences, right? Like, Manderley is going to fucking town on the Freys, turning them into meat pies and shit in Winterfell. The political choices of the houses that were sworn to House Stark and now have to serve the Bolton are making decisions based on what happened at the Red Wedding within the book. It's just, all of these, he's really good at these interconnected character relationships and weaving them together to where it's understandable. It's really understandable to then understand the wider political scope of what's going on within his world. But of course, that is an outlier of someone that is an exceptionally skilled writer. I need to read just more books from lesser known authors. I can't think of any off the top of my head right now. That also did this good. This is a hard one to do because in the book series, it starts with a Red Knight. It's Greater Sun Cycle by Miles Cameron. There are character deaths that happen in that book that don't really... They hurt the character initially and then the character moves on, and they don't seem to really have lasting consequences. The character doesn't really think back on the death of that character, and that's what really, like, lots of characters like end up dying in that series, but I'm ultimately left not giving a single fuck about any of them, because of how the author handled them. Did not work for me.
Not only that, but the death of a loved one is one of those things that almost everyone has a personal experience with sooner or later. Morbid though it may be, this is a trope that people can relate to, which only adds to its overall power and widespread usefulness. But because of this, there's a dark reflection of this trope that sees equal, if not greater, use.
The one I was just,
The fake-out major character death.
Oh.
This trope has all the benefits of the true character death trope with the added bonus that the character's not actually dead. You get to reap all the benefits of the emotional impact of the death, and keep the character, and get the emotional impact of the character's triumphant return from the grave. It's almost literally having your cake and eating it too, and also getting a better cake on the side. But what that means is that it can be almost impossible for an audience to tell the difference between a fake-out death and a real death. It's in the writer's best interest to make a fake-out death as realistic as possible, because that's how they convince the audience that it's not really a fake-out death, and therefore get to use all the benefits of the real death trope. But thanks to the widespread usage of the fake-out death trope, it's also in a writer's best interest to make a real character death even more convincing than fake-out deaths, because otherwise you run the risk of an audience that straight up doesn't buy that the character's really dead. What's basically happened is a fictional arms...
Which is what we are having in Star Wars right now. We have, and it really started, you can really blame Maul for this. Like, I enjoyed Maul coming back. I'm glad he's fucking dead, though. He was starting to get over fucking used. He's overused. I enjoy his character, but like he's done. He's done. Let him fucking stay dead. But with Maul coming back, what that essentially did is it opened Pandora's box for Star Wars characters and Star Wars fans to be like, he could still be alive. He also fell a great fucking distance. Mace Windu is fucking dead. I'm sorry. If Mace Windu had survived that fucking fall, he would have still been killed within the first 6 months of the Empire, because motherfucker would have started fighting the Empire the moment he stood up from the ground. That's why he's dead and should stay dead. I love Samuel L. Jackson, but Mace Windu's dead. He should not survive that fall, because otherwise creates a very big inconsistency, a very big plot hole if he survives for more than 6 months after his fight with Sidious. Unless, of course, he's in a bacta tank for a year or whatever. If you say, oh, he some Jedi sympathizer or fucking whatever, Bail Organa found him and put him in a bacta. Yoda and Bail Organa found him and put him in a bacta fucking tank for a year. Then he can survive for over a year, but he ain't surviving more than 2 years. Because Mace ain't the kind of guy to sit back. He's the kind of guy to go and fight. He's a fighter.
Race of narrative tricks between the real and fake death tropes, each one trying to be more convincing than the other. So right now, it takes a lot of work to convince your readers that your character is dead. And this is a problem for writers using both the real and the fake-out death tropes. Certain audiences have gotten so used to fake-out deaths that they almost assume that any and all potential deaths will be corrected within the space of a few minutes. Unfortunately, it strips a lot of the potential drama.
And one of the problems with this is, another problem with making a believable fake-out death is that essentially the body cannot be found, or the character has to be killed essentially off screen. It's like Aragorn falling off the cliff in Two Towers. That's essentially how you do a fake out death, because if the people see the body, they'll notice if he's breathing or not, right? And then maybe they'll even hold a burial for them, so the character has to, her body has to be taken away. Which then, of course, because the trope has been done so much, the moment a character, is killed off screen, or there's a fade to black, right? Like Mace Windu, we don't see him die. We see he's still alive as he falls, essentially, right? He only lost his hand and then got electrocuted and then he fell, and we are meant to believe that he died on the landing. But then, of course, because Darth Maul survived his fucking fall, we've seen Jedi jump from great heights and survive. That, of course, Star Wars created the problem there. In universe of, it is plausible for Mace Windu to survive. However, it is better for him to stay dead, because he would not survive for long anyways. Because he'd go out and fight. And so it's a lot harder to make a fake death feel real, because no one's going to believe a character is dead if you kill them off screen.
Drama out of what logically should be one of the most dramatic tropes in existence. I'd say that shonen anime is probably the biggest offender here. How many times have we seen our hero annihilated by an attack and pronounced almost certainly dead, only to have some danger-induced super mode activate and make them even cooler than they were before, or a last-minute rescue that pulled them out of the suspiciously opaque dust cloud before they got hit, or in the absolute worst-case scenario, to show up swathed in skin-tight bandages in the very next scene. The only drama gained from a shonen fake-out death is how much damage the other characters might take in their absence. It's nearly impossible to convincingly kill a shonen protagonist, which is okay because it basically never happens anyway. One step up from that is most superhero.
Which is why I'm curious how they're gonna kill Naruto or Sasuke in Boruto, because they're because of the decision, as from my perspective as a writer, and the decisions that the people writing Boruto, and I know Kishimoto's back, and he's been writing Boruto for the last several chapters or something. It feels like they are leading up to Naruto needing to make a big sacrifice and having to die. And it is not going to go well. That death is not going to go well. Boruto should not have been made.
Media. Because while some characters do actually manage to die, there are just way too many ways for them to come back. My personal favorite example is X-Men's Nightcrawler, who managed to be dead for a whole year before he escaped death by teleporting back to life. That's next level. But even outside of serendipitous superpowers, you've got Lazarus pits, questing into hell, literal magic, robot duplicates, clones, totally unexplained revivals, and way too many other ways to resurrect characters. This is a problem that transcends superhero stuff. Any universe with even one way to resurrect someone is going to have some serious problems convincing the audience that anyone dead is going to stay that way, or even worse, justifying to the audience why they aren't using that established method of resurrection to resurrect their favorite character. But even beyond that,
which another thing George R. R. Martin has done really well, very few people are able to resurrect, and even if you are resurrected, you are not going to be coming back entirely the same. You are going to be pretty different.
Sometimes the thing that makes your audience unwilling to buy a character death is just how important that character is. It doesn't matter if they're only mostly dead or all the way dead or dead and definitely going to stay that way. If they're a central character, or even worse, a central character with unresolved subplots, a lot of your audience is just going to refuse to believe they're dead because it doesn't make sense.
Which is why George killing Ned Stark in Book 1 and then Robb Stark in Book 3 has made it plausible for the audience to believe that Jon Snow could stay dead. However, then, because the show got ahead of him with Season 6, now the entire audience knows, like, yeah, Jon Snow's going to be coming back.
Sense from a meta perspective to kill off such a useful source of plot. This entire section is going to be a Game of Thrones spoiler, so if you somehow
I'm curious if she's going to be talking about the shit I've been talking about.
To avoid those, skip ahead. Consider the now infamous death of Jon Snow from Game of Thrones. Now, George R. R. Martin spent a considerable amount of effort creating a universe in which anyone could die, no matter how much we liked him. There was magic, but it wasn't your standard D&D spend a diamond to res your friend kind of magic. People only ever came back from the dead as zombies, or in the best case scenario, as screwed up, diminished versions of their former selves. Most people just died, and it didn't matter how central they were to the narrative or how unfinished their personal arcs were. Life isn't fair, and neither is death. It was almost a running gag that every character you loved would inevitably end up dying horribly because this is Game of Thrones. But despite all of that, when Jon Snow got super murdered, about half the fanbase just kinda straight up didn't buy it. I saw theories ranging from he'll come back as an ice zombie, to that one witch lady can revive him, to hey, it's not guaranteed.
Wait, was this made before Season 6 came out?
That he's bled out yet, maybe he'll just be fine, to obviously Jon Snow just keeps a lot of jam jars under that cloak, and about a million others. It didn't matter that it was a show that had never brought anyone back as more than a shambling, corpseified monster. Jon Snow was important enough that people weren't convinced that getting stabbed a dozen times in the chest would be enough to kill him. Personally, I had a meta reason to not buy that he was gone for good. At the
Yeah, true.
time, they hadn't yet resolved the mystery of his true parentage. Such a big deal had been made over the meaning of R+L=J, and there were so many conspiracy theories, and in-universe his heritage and parentage were explicitly suspicious. But if he was dead, there would be no point in resolving that subplot because it wouldn't matter to any of the characters left alive. I didn't think George R. R. Martin would let such an important mystery suddenly lose all momentum, so I figured they'd bring him back somehow. And they did, obviously. But the point is,
no, this was made after. Okay.
Even if you've carefully crafted a universe in which death is pretty much irreversible and you're not afraid to use it, it doesn't mean you can actually pull off every character death without losing your audience's suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
Now, in order to counterbalance,
She makes a really good argument about, even though, right, like, there are people though that have pushed back against this that I've seen online saying that Jon Snow is fucking dead. But yeah, when you look at it from that meta perspective that Red mentioned, Jon can't fucking be dead.
Balance this kind of problem. There are a lot of frequently used.
So now the question though is, and I think George probably also intentionally did this. I'm sure he was a part of George was hoping that people would believe and accept Jon Snow as being dead. But of course, very hard to make a character like Jon Snow believably dead. So I think he had set it up where if you're not going to believe his death, like if you're among the group of people that do not believe Jon Snow is permanently dead, you are then, because of Lady Stoneheart, you are now going to be thinking, what is Jon going to be like when he comes back, right?
Use writer strategies, both for fake and real deaths.
And then, of course, how does his relationship with Ghost, how is that going to change? Because as he dies, I think the last thing he says is Ghost. And I think when Robb Stark died, he said Grey Wind. Insinuating that Robb died not once but twice. He warged into Grey Wind before he died. And then Grey Wind was killed. And so he died twice. But we know Ghost is still. We don't know if Ghost is dead or alive. I think Ghost is still fucking alive. So is Ghost gonna also be different when Jon comes back, or if Jon comes back?
That theoretically help make them feel more convincing. Unfortunately, a lot of those strategies no longer work because they've been used so much for fake-out deaths that nobody buys them as real deaths. For example, logically, a character falling from an enormous height or getting.
She's using examples that I fucking mentioned. Holy shit. We're on the same wavelength here, Red.
Disintegrated should make them well and truly dead. But thanks to the number of conveniently soft rivers at the bottom of cliffs, conveniently placed branches to grab onto, and a frequent tendency for major villains to fall from high places and then inexplicably show up again later with no justification, the general rule is that falling off a cliff is no longer considered a viable threat. The disintegration thing is a little subtler, but the main thing is that a weapon that makes your character vanish entirely might not actually disintegrate them at all, since a lot of sci-fi weapons like that are secretly teleporters or time machines. Once one writer uses the disintegration teleporter switcheroo trick, it ruins disintegration for the audience. Although you can still make it convincing if it, like, shows their skeleton or they dissolve into sand or something. But the general rule is, if you can't show your audience a body, they can't pass for dead, since there are way too many ways for them to just show up again. It barely even requires an explanation anymore. So show your audience a body. Even better, show them a body and have someone confirm that that body is super dead. This still isn't a guarantee that they're actually dead, since sometimes that someone is tricking you into thinking they're dead for whatever reason, and any fictional universe with healing mojo or magic bloodlines or the power of friendship or the power of love or super advanced tech or even just kinda advanced tech will be able to fix a corpseified character with a little bit of hand-waving. But still, if you don't show a body, they won't buy the death. Next up, you gotta make it sufficiently tragic. This is another one that's important for fake-out deaths because it can be easy to make a fake death happen uncharacteristically quickly and easily, regardless of how tough the character is, since it's just a matter of getting the death out of the way so the plot can progress. When you're leading up to the character death, put us inside that character's head. Show us their fear, the last thing they think of, whatever flashbacks are running through their head. Do they believe they're about to die, or was it a surprise? Are they okay with it? Have they come to terms with it? And how hard are they willing to fight against it? If they're not the type to give up easily, don't let them. Although be warned, sometimes stories will go way too far in this direction and indirectly convince the audience that the character is going to be okay because no real death scene would ever be this overblown. This is the reaction I had to a late-ish episode of Fairy Tail, where a supposed suicide mission was preceded by about 5 minutes of flashbacks of all the good times and conversations about how maybe this wasn't such a bad way for our story to end and at least we're together, and after spending nearly half the episode convincing us that they were super gonna die, you guys, they got saved at the last second by a guy with teleportation powers. It's a very fine line between just the right amount of pre-dying angst and ham-fisted knife twisting, as we recall that one time in season 1 where I said I'd always be by your side, but now I won't be able to. In contrast, one of the best examples I've seen recently with just the right amount of knife twisting was actually fairly understated and didn't even include any flashbacks. I won't give story specifics about which show or character I'm talking about because it's a fantastic scene that hasn't made it to the show yet, and I absolutely refuse to be the one to spoil it for anyone watching it, like my brother, who watches these videos, watches that show, and never listens to spoiler warnings. But basically, this character is fighting someone way outside of his league in order to protect someone else, and is pretty much absolutely convinced that he's literally seconds from death. Now, he's a very clever fighter, and his brain usually goes a mile a minute during battles, but his inner monologue in the most desperate, brutal panel of that battle is just him, barely coherent, mentally apologizing to his mentor and his mom. He stopped trying to think of a way to win or even survive, and it drives home incredibly effectively just how dead he thinks he is. Anyway, the bottom line is, for your character death to feel convincing, there needs to be some kind of fanfare. And by fanfare, I don't mean like high drama necessarily, it just needs sufficient stuff happening. Whether that's internal or external, before or after the dying happens, doesn't matter. It just needs to be addressed, because if it's not, the death will feel too cheap. And while that works fine for side characters, if you're killing or pretending to kill a main character, the last thing you want it to feel like is cheap. This also means you have to make sure the other characters react properly in the aftermath. And again, this is true whether or not the character's really permanently dead. One of the more subtle tells that a character will likely be coming back is that the other characters stall in the grieving process. If someone dies and the writer intends to have them not be dead but wants to play up the sad as much as possible, then they can have the other characters totally falling apart and unable to handle themselves without the totally dead character. This is because as soon as that character comes back, they can all go back to normal no problem. So from a plot perspective, the writer loses nothing by making them all fall apart completely in the meantime. But this can clue your reader in that the character has to come back, because the feeling is that the only way for things to get fixed is for that character to come back. Now, as a result, this can actually be a very useful trick if the character really is dead, or if they're alive but not coming back for a long while in plot time, because this lets you discuss in-universe the grieving process and the internal hope that maybe the character's not dead after all. If your characters stall in the grieving process and then have to pull themselves out because the person they're missing isn't coming back, you get some seriously quality sad and some cool character strengthening moments. Now, all of these difficulties basically happen when you're trying to kill off a central protagonist. Killing off secondary protagonists is a lot easier to pull off since it's not as implausible for them to die, but conveniently, minor character deaths can be just as tragic as a main character death if you play it right. For a well-worn example, spoilers for every version of Fullmetal Alchemist are about to happen, so heads up, the death of Maze Hughes is convincing, tragic, and the consequences are felt right up until the end of the series. Hughes is by far the most lovable character in the early series. He's got a lovely wife, an adorable daughter that means the world to him, and has taken in the two main characters for the duration of their time in Central and treats them almost like they're his own kids. He's great friends with the otherwise hard-edged Colonel Roy Mustang, and overall adds a feeling of levity to every scene he's in. But despite being overall a totally wacky, friendly dude, he's also very smart, and underneath all the silliness, is surprisingly confident in a straight fight. If you look carefully in the early episodes, you can actually see that he's got at least one throwing knife on his belt at all times, which becomes relevant when he gets attacked in the lead up to his death scene, and turns out to be an absolute beast at throwing knives. The lead up to his death scene is long and tense, since he's just used those charming smarts of his to uncover a huge country-spanning conspiracy that ends up being the plot of the entire show. In an attempt to silence him before he can get the word out, he's been attacked and injured by two immortal homunculi, and he's trying to reach a phone where he can call Mustang, the only guy he trusts, without it being overheard by the very people behind the conspiracy. It looks like he's made it, and then it turns out the person escorting him isn't a trusted coworker, but instead a shape-shifting homunculus about to murder him. The homunculus transforms into his beloved wife, and Maze, true to his character, can't even bring himself to fight back to save his own life if it means hurting her, and subsequently gets shot. He dies, there's a funeral, his wife is devastated, his daughter doesn't understand the concept of death yet and keeps asking how he's supposed to get any work done if they bury him, everyone in the military is shaken, the Elric brothers freak out and mourn, and Roy Mustang sets off on a 4-season-long quest for revenge on whoever or whatever it was that murdered his best friend. Nothing is the same after Maze Hughes dies. Now, another thing that makes Maze Hughes' death
I need to watch Fullmetal Alchemist.
very interesting is the way it's handled when Mustang finally does track down his shapeshifting murderer. Now obviously Mustang's entire motivation is revenge, but over the course of their confrontation, it becomes clear that Mustang has long since come to terms with Hughes' death, but it's done nothing to diminish his desire for revenge. While he's chasing down the homunculus and setting him on fire a whole bunch, they try their old trick of shapeshifting into a loved one and take the form of none other than Mustang's old bestie, Maze Hughes, in the hopes that it'll stop Mustang from setting them on fire so much. When Mustang sees his old friend miraculously hale and healthy again, he actually sets him on fire more, because he knows Maze Hughes is dead, and his killer wearing his image is the ultimate insult. This is cool because Roy recognizes the fact that Hughes is dead and that murdering this guy won't bring him back, but it doesn't matter to him at this point. All that matters is the revenge itself, not the reason for the revenge. It takes a lot of work to cool him down and get him off the murder train so he can actually process his grief properly. This is actually very important. Once you got your character convincingly dead, you have to properly address the consequences. A lot of the time, character deaths, especially relatively minor ones, are kind of glossed over. Sure, tragic and all that, but within a week or two, everyone's moved on with their lives. But that is still a dead character who isn't coming back. Anyone who liked them or even knew them is going to be affected. They don't have to be affected that much, but there should still be something. Or, if they're not affected, maybe specifically address why that is and whether they feel like they should be affected but aren't. It can be easy to forget it in the age of grimdark, but death is still like a really major thing, and it should always have a consequence for the characters in proximity. So, yeah.
Yeah, essentially, what I had been saying at the beginning consequences matter. It needs to be felt throughout the entire story. You can't just kill them and then forget about them. They matter to someone. They are people, or well, they are characters. They are people in your world. But that was Trope Talk Character Death. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.